Wrong. Returns from the South and the West heavily favored President Wilson, and as a result, he was successful in his re-election campaign. Only other election like this was the election of 1948. I'll tell you about that in just a second. So, Charles Evans Hughes goes to bed on election eve believing he would be the next president of the United States because he does not believe Wilson could win enough of the South or West to make a comeback. He is wrong. Wilson wins heavily in those two areas and is re-elected President of the United States. So, President Wilson's victory gives Americans their desire for peace, right? Unfortunately, peace is not going to last very long, and America is going to have to get involved. Now, just a side note, you don't have to write down, the only other election that was like this was when Harry Truman ran. And he ran against Thomas Dewey, and Dewey crushed him in the East and the North to the point where the papers were so confident that the Chicago Tribune actually printed Dewey defeats Truman. And when Truman won by the Southern and Western votes, he gleefully stood up in front of the media and held up that Chicago Tribune that says, Dewey defeats Truman. It was kind of a historic picture, and we'll get into that next year.
Do you have that newspaper?
I don't know, I wished I did. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the United States declares war and raises an army.
There's always eBay.
I've been on it, don't think I haven't. Just not willing to pay. I spent a lot of money the last couple of days on a couple of things, which I may share with you at about 10:15. Well, by the winter of 1916-1917, that would be like December 1916 to January 1917, the stress between Germany and the United States just continued and war became inevitable. And finally, on April 6th of 1917, the United States declares war on Germany. So during the winter of 1916-1917, all American hopes of remaining neutral is going to go away. There is too much continued stress between Germany and the United States over this war in Europe. And finally, on April 6th of 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany. It was a good thing because the Allies in Europe were in horrible shape, getting their fannies kicked. And their hope was they could hold on and not have to surrender until the United States could get there. So, I mean, that was pressure. So the big goal in Europe for the Allies is they're in such bad shape, they're just hoping they can hold on until the United States could arrive. Because if the United States doesn't get there pretty quick, they're going to lose this war to the Central Powers. Well, Wilson had two options to consider when he assembled fighting men for the war. Because what was the last war we fought in? Spanish-American War, which lasted 3 months. I mean, what was the last major war before that? Civil War. So, we haven't been in a war in a while either that mattered. So Wilson's got to raise some fighting men. He's got two ways to do it. How could he do it? Give me a way he could do it. Rachel, how could he do it? How'd Lincoln do it? Ask for volunteers. What could he do if he didn't want to do that? He could establish the draft. Okay? So Wilson had two options considered to assemble fighting men for this war. He could either ask for volunteers or he could establish the draft. Which did he do? On May 7th of 1917, Wilson signs a bill into Congress that enacts the draft. For the first time we're going to have a draft. And the minimum age was 21 at that time. Minimum age was 21. So, on May 7th of 1917, President Wilson signs a bill into Congress that enacts the draft, and it sets the minimum age at 21 years. Now, what do you have to do if they enact the draft? You've got to register first. You still have to do that now. That's called the selective service now. So by June 5th of 1917, approximately 10 million men registered for the draft. By June 5th of 1917, nearly 10 million men had registered for the draft. By November of 1918, 5 million men were under arms representing the United States military. 5 million. That's incredible. And we'll talk about that later. So by June 5th, 1917, 10 million men had registered for the draft, and by latter stages of the war, there were actually 5 million men serving our country in the armed services. Anybody know how the draft works? I'll give you a little bit to write this down. So it was especially important that you understand this in Vietnam because that was the last draft we had, okay? And nobody wanted to go there. But here's how you get drafted. So, anybody have any idea how you get drafted? Go ahead.
When you sign up, don't you have to do some physical testing and?
Well, we'll get to that. Yeah, and the Vietnam guys would go to they'd show up, with dresses on and everything else, so they could be mentally incapable of serving the armed services. It was kind of crazy. We'll get into that. But how does the draft work? How do you get drafted?
They send you something.
No, you're born with it. This is how you get drafted. You're born with it.
Social Security.
No, close.
Well, they had it.
You're born with a. Just a second.
Whose birthday is it today? They call it the birthday.
Somebody in the other class.
Birth certificate?
Oh, Sully, when's your birthday? Her birthday's June 7th. So what they do is they put 365 ping pong balls in like a bingo machine.
Oh,
What?
you get picked.
Yeah, and they reach in there and they pick June 7th out. First number they pick. That means Sully Ann Quenches has the draft number 1. Then they reach in there and they grab another ball. What's your birthday, Andy? November 15th comes up next. Everybody that registered for the draft that has a November 15th birthday is number 2. And they decide how many balls they're going to pull. They may only pull 10. You know what I'm saying? Because you have 10 million people registered, you don't need to pull 365. So what they'll say is, okay, we're going to pull the first 10. So guess what? They give Sully a call, say, Sully, all the people with draft numbers 1 through 5, you report immediately to Fort Hood for basic training. You have been drafted. That's how it works.
What about?
What's that? Well, it's a good question. I wonder if they do throw that day in there. I guess you'd be a little lucky. I'm going to do some checking on that. Nobody's asked me. Brady Rasmussen is a leap year baby. I wonder what happened if you drew that one. I'm going to find out. I'm going to call a military guy. That intrigues me. Nobody's ever asked me that. But that's how you get a draft number. And if you were getting ready to go in Vietnam, you did not want a 1 or 2. Well, you know what I'm saying? That's how they do it. That's how the draft works. So you're hoping like crazy they draw you 343rd. You know what I mean? Because they're probably not going to get that far up on the list.
Do they still do it that way?
That's what they still do it. Yeah. Basically, I don't know if they do ping pong balls, but they probably do it electronically. It's the same philosophy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now, once we're ready to fight, what does Wilson have to get to make this a team effort? Because he doesn't have it really. He has to get support of the American people. Because you got a lot of immigrants, right? He's got to get support. So what he does is he creates something called the Committee on Public Information. He creates the Committee on Public Information because he's got to get all Americans to understand that we need to fight in this on the side of the Allies, even though we have German Americans and Irish Americans, okay? So he creates this Committee on Public Information, and he picks a guy by the name of George Creel to chair the committee. So to drum up public support for our entrance into World War I and get everybody on the same page as a team, President Wilson creates the Committee on Public Information, and he appoints George Creel to chair the committee. And we're going to end with this today. I'm going to tell you some of the things they did to help the war effort. First of all, you ever heard of war bonds? How do you think we found? They called them Liberty bonds. But one thing that this Committee on Public Information did is they initiated the sale of Liberty bonds to finance the war. That's a big deal, and it was huge in World War II, which we'll talk about later. Now, Elise, my dear, what's the advantage of you buying a $100 Liberty bond to help support the war? I'm going to take your $100. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? How much do you get back?
Probably more than that.
Yeah, you get 100 plus whatever the interest rate is. Bonds are kind of, savings bonds are kind of a takeoff of that. If you buy $100 savings bonds for 50, and 15 years from now it's worth 100, so you doubled your money. But Liberty bonds were the same way. You would buy these bonds, and then the government would pay you back with interest at the end of the war, and they would take that money and finance the war. Now, we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, the second thing that the Committee on Public Information did, because who are we really fighting here? Germany. I mean, Austria-Hungary is throwing some things in there in Turkey, but the ones you're really fighting are Germany. So what this Committee on Public Information did is they got out there with PR and helped lead an anti-German attitude across the United States. Okay? So they got out there in their PR and they made the Germans look as bad as they could so that people would want to fight them. And I'm going to give you three kind of crazy examples of what they did. And I'm going to tell you right now that Mr. Tonkovich would not be happy about this. They banned the teaching of German in all public schools. So the Committee on Public Information helped lead to an anti-German attitude across the United States. And the first example is all public schools across the country banned the teaching of the German language in schools. You know what they called sauerkraut? They didn't call it sauerkraut anymore. They called it liberty cabbage.
What?
Nobody, you didn't use the word sauerkraut, because that's German, you called it liberty cabbage.
That's perfect.
It's true though, it even gets weirder. Because what's something that, Alexa, you maybe caught when you were a little child and you only want to get them once? What? You're close. They called them the German, you ever heard of measles? Yeah, kind of like chicken. Yeah, so at that time, German measles, they called them German measles because they originated in Germany, German measles, and nobody said they caught German measles anymore. They caught liberty measles. I'm not making that up.
Why not just make it measles?
I don't know. That's what they did. But anything that was German orientated was looked down upon and changed. Yeah, I'm not making that up. That's what they did. Because they needed to get morale up. They needed people to be against Germany. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic, which will prepare us for tomorrow. Get it written down today. The United States in World War I, the Great War. The United States in World War I, the Great War.